welcome back to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm Pay Poblete, a legislative reporter with Colorado Politics and your host for this show. And we're going to really touch on what has become the major political story this fall in Colorado, and that's redistricting. And we'll start by bringing in a man who's been covering this better than probably anyone else in the state, and that is the Gazette's data and investigative reporter, Evan Wyloge. Evan, since we last recorded one of these shows, there's been a pretty major update to the redistricting process. So let's just kick it off there. What's going on there?
Sure. So the Congressional Redistricting Commission has finished up most of their work. They met and selected a final map that they are submitting to the Supreme Court. And they have submitted at least their initial report to the Supreme Court, and then they will be submitting a brief that supports it by tomorrow, Friday at noon. And along with that, there's going to be a lot of other parties who will be filing briefs telling the court whether they like the map and would like to see it implemented, or whether they think that it doesn't meet the constitutional requirements and needs to be reworked. There's going to be an oral argument on that topic next Tuesday. So we'll all be watching that real closely to try to see whether or not there are problems that the court identifies, or whether the map will be approved by the court and allowed to be used for next year and the rest of the decade. That's the Congressional Commission. The Legislative Commission is kind of coming into their final selection process now. They have had their third staff draft map plan presented, and that is the kind of most recent iteration on the ideas they've been discussing and trying to hone in on. From here, they have a meeting scheduled for the next several days, and they would be able to select a final map to submit to the Supreme Court, like the Congressional Commission, as early as looking like Friday, Saturday. I think Saturday would actually technically be the first day they could adopt something, but it sounds like what they're trying to do is bring up a bunch of new options for themselves today, which would mean then they could start selecting a final map as early as Sunday. But they have until next Tuesday to make that selection. So that's the quickest, most summarized synopsis of where we're at right now, I think.
Now, Evan, as much as this pains me to say as a legislative reporter, let's put a pin in the legislative stuff for now and circle back to the congressional maps. Now, both you and I have been hearing from some folks that were kind of on the unhappy side of how those maps were drafted. I'm going to kick it over to you. Talk a little bit about that. And I guess broadly, what are the plans for if this map is approved by the Supreme Court?
Sure. So there's a lot of provisions that the redistricting commissions needed to follow. They were all in that set of amendments that was passed by voters in 2018. And the problem that has been identified by some groups is the issue of whether or not the maps properly protect the state's minority voters. And in this state, that's what we're generally talking about is Hispanic and Latino voters. And I've already heard from some attorneys and folks who say that they see problems and they intend to challenge these maps. So they're going to go to court and file a brief by the end of this week, by tomorrow. And then next week, they will be asking to participate in that oral argument to make the case that, the commission didn't go far enough when they tried to analyze and decide where and how to draw districts that would empower the minority voters. And that is one of the parts of that amendment, that set of amendments that was passed in 2018, is preventing voter dilution, minority, racial or language minority voter dilution.
Now, the redistricting stuff is a great transition on to political correspondent and campaign trail extraordinaire, Ernest Luning. Now, Ernest, we've heard you speak on this program a number of times saying that once the congressional lines are nearly final, there could be a flood of candidates jumping in. And now I want to focus specifically on this new 8th congressional district. Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, we're seeing a couple of new candidates in that district. So far, there's just been one, Yadira Caraveo, who's a Democrat from Thornton. She's a pediatrician, and she's been running for about a month and a half for that seat, which is going to be in the north side of Denver, running from Adams County up I-25 up to Greeley. We had a new candidate jump in this week. It's Chaz Tedesco. He's a Democrat, and he's an Adams County commissioner. And he's got support from the unions. He was a president of the local steelworkers union before he was a commissioner. And that's probably a sector of the Democratic Party that isn't really represented so far in the primary. Another candidate, a Republican who's a first-time candidate named Jules Gray. She's a wedding photographer, and she said she was inspired to run because of the results of the 2020 election, which may be problematic for the Republicans on that side if that's what they're focusing on. But she's jumping in and making her campaign official next week. There's 3 state senators, though, on the Republican side who are being recruited to various degrees by folks in DC and some Republicans around the state here who think that they could take advantage of the seat's competitive nature. That's State Senator Kevin Priola, John Cook, and Barbara Kirkmeyer. And I think we're going to see one and possibly 2 of them get in the primary in the next few weeks or so.
Now, Ernest, I'll ask you to put on your amateur, I guess, prophesizing hat. Who do you see really emerging out of that pack of Republicans or potential pack of Republicans, should it come down to the candidates that you've mentioned right now come the election time?
No, it depends who runs. I think Kevin Priola, who's the only member of the legislature who's won a race in a Democratic leaning district. He's the only Republican to have won one of those seats in the last 2 cycles. He's a guy who could win this seat for Republicans pretty easily. I think John Cook could also give the Democrat a run for his or her money. And, we'll have to see. Candidates, we just have to look over to Colorado's Western Slope to see that first-time candidates who are filled with passion can actually win a congressional seat. Lauren Boebert did that just less than a year ago. So Jules Gray, let's not count her out.
We're not counting anyone out quite yet, Ernest, but let's transition now from the 8th CD onto the US Senate race, and particularly the Republican side that I want to focus on, since we do have an incumbent. There's been a lot of headlines coming out of the Republican side of that race, mainly generated by someone from my neck of the woods from the General Assembly, and that is Representative Ron Hanks. You wrote a good story on his, I guess, initial announcement and then subsequent campaign videos. What can you tell us about that in the field broadly?
Well, in the last week, Pat, the Republican Senate field has virtually doubled. There were 4 candidates going in. And at the end of the week here, we've got 7 candidates running against Michael Bennet. Like you say, Ron Hanks, he jumped in the race. Friday, he filed paperwork, got a lot of attention. Yesterday, that'd be Wednesday as we're recording this. Yesterday, he released a video that had everybody buzzing. It had kind of a Office Story kind of ending where he blew up a copier that had the label Dominion Voting Systems on it. Ron Hanks is he's what did he call himself? A pro-Trump warrior, and he said that what he wants to talk about is election integrity and the Second Amendment. Now, how well those topics are going to play with Colorado's unaffiliated voters remains to be seen, but it's clear that the Senate campaign, the Senate primary campaign, none of the other candidates are going to be able to avoid talking about the contention that the election was rigged. And that's not something that probably any of the other candidates want to spend time doing, because no one outside a core part of the Republican Party even believes that. So, they're probably not too anxious to see Ron get in the race. We had, and quickly, two other Republican businessmen jumped in the race too in the last week. There's Gino Campana, who's a developer and home builder up in Fort Collins. And there's John O'Day, who's a construction company concrete company executive here in Denver. And both of them have the potential to be self-funding in the race. Neither has run for higher office before. Campana served a term in the Fort Collins City Council a while back, but both of them are going to bring a business kind of perspective to the race that it hasn't really had so far. And we'll see if they get a chance to talk about the things they want to talk about with Ron Hanks in the race.
Now, Ernest, I'll ask you the same question about the Senate race that I did about the 8th CD on the Republican side, with the obvious caveat that we have a ways to go until the primary, and this is not a stable field by any means. But talking about it now in October 2021, who's looking strong right now?
I don't think you can count anybody out. We saw last time Michael Bennet was on the ballot, the Republicans nominated a county commissioner from El Paso County named Darrell Glenn, who most of the folks around the state hadn't even heard from before the race. He was in a 5-way primary with some heavy hitters, including a couple of self-funders, one from Fort Collins, who wrote himself a check for $1 million, came in second in the primary, but didn't win the nomination. Colorado Republicans are, they've proven that they're willing to nominate whoever can get the most excited about the race. And that could well happen this time. I think it's an open field at this point.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, Ernest. It's valued as always. And you can read Ernest's work and Evan's work at coloradopolitics.com or on the Gazette. And for both of those guys, I'm Pat Poblete. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and we will see you again soon.